U.S. President Donald Trump says he's not joking about trying for a third term in office. Trump told NBC News there are ways that he could do it, although he isn't actively considering it. It is important to note here that the U.S. Constitution does not allow for a president to run for a third term. The 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951, limits presidents to 2 terms in office. Sunday on Air Force One, the president took questions from reporters about this. Take a listen.
You said you were not joking about a third term, about possibly wanting a third term. Does that mean you're not planning to leave office on January 20th?
I'm not looking at that, but I'll tell you, I have had more people ask me to have a third term, which is in a way a fourth term, because the other election, the 2020 election, was totally rigged. So it's actually sort of a fourth term in a certain way. I just don't want the credit for the second, because Biden was so bad. He did such a bad job. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm popular, if you want to know the truth.
Well, for more on the possibility of more presidential terms, third terms, fourth terms, I'm joined now by Gloria Brown-Marshall. She's a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College in New York City. She is also the author of A Protest History of the United States, and that book due to come out this April. Professor, it's good to have you on the day. I have to ask you, does President Trump, does he know something we do not? Are there constitutional loopholes that could open the door to more than 2 terms for him?
Well, Donald Trump, I believe, does not really read the Constitution or believe he has to follow it. And that's why the United States is in a constitutional crisis at the moment. So even though, as you pointed out, the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution says that no person can be elected twice as president of the United States, some people fear that he is not going to be elected more than twice, that he is going to be put in office through some backdoor plan with J.D. Vance, his vice president.
Yeah.
And so he wouldn't be technically elected. And that's where a lot of this is turning.
All right, I want to pick up on that then. So this possibility of J.D. Vance running for president in 2028 with Donald Trump as his vice presidential running mate. Now, let's assume Vance wins, then he resigns. Donald Trump would then be the vice president who becomes president yet again. Is that possible?
But under the 12th Amendment of the Constitution, the last line, it states that no person who is ineligible to be president of the United States can be vice president of the United States. So that's another reason why it's very difficult to see what the plan is for him to take this third term. And yes, he lost his re-election bid in 2020, even though he claims to the public that he did not. He's also stated behind closed doors, and all the courts have said that he did, in fact, lose re-election. Mm-hmm. And so I think the other concern that we have, and that I've heard, is that he could create chaos in a way in this country, get us into a war or some type of financial crisis, and then claim that now we need to amend the Constitution in order for him to have a third term and save the country that he's actually put in harm's way.
Well, I want to ask you about amending the amendment in just a moment, but let's say we have a situation where the president wants another term. Could he sue and ask the Supreme Court to hear his case and to decide whether or not the 22nd Amendment can be bent in his favor? He does have a conservative majority in the Supreme Court. Is that possible?
He not only has a conservative majority, he has 3 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court that were handpicked by him, vetted by him, and basically have been doing his will the majority of the time that they've been on the bench. I would say that, unfortunately for him, that the U.S. Constitution cannot be changed by lawsuit. It cannot even be changed by the U.S. Supreme Court. But the U.S. Supreme Court can interpret the Second Amendment in a way that could help him. And that's another question that's been put before several constitutional scholars. What interpretation can be given to something that's very clear, where it says no person elected for office can be in that office for more than 2 terms? What type of interpretation can even his followers on the U.S. Supreme Court give that straightforward language that would allow him to have a 3rd term? And as I said, it's turned most often on the word elected.
Yeah. Let me ask you about amending the amendment. What would have to happen to change the U.S. Constitution? I mean, do you even think that's in the realm of possibility in a very polarized America today?
I think because the Republicans control the House and the Senate, that it might be an attempt that's made. It would take the Congress and 2/3 vote of the states legislatures. And then if it started in the states, it would take 2/3 of the Congress. But either way, you have to have the state legislatures and you have to have the majority of the Congress in order to amend the Constitution. I think that they could start that process as quickly as possible, and it takes years. But he would want to do so before the midterm elections, because I think it's not going to bode well for his party for midterm elections. There, even among his base, there are a lot of people who are fighting back and protesting what's happening to their Social Security, their pension benefits, what's happening to their jobs, the economy, the price of food. So I think he claims in his mind that he's doing a great job. And so therefore, the people will rise up and want him to serve a 3rd term. But I think the people have been saying very clearly that they're unhappy so far with his legislation by fiat, with executive orders taking the place of Congress.
Well, Professor, you mentioned that the U.S. is in a constitutional crisis now, but let me ask you, what about if Donald Trump does indeed try to pursue a 3rd term? Wouldn't that be the mother of all constitutional crises?
If he attempted to serve a 3rd term, I think it would further splinter the country, or it would cause his base to actually ask themselves, do they really want a democracy, or did they always want a king? And they were just waiting for the right one. What's taking place in this country is what the framers of our Constitution feared in 1787 when they drafted the Constitution. They feared that the power of the federal government and both houses would be used against the people. And that's what's happening right now. And so the people then are trying to find some leverage, and so the voices can be heard, and to put a stop to this press of executive power well beyond what is stated in the Constitution. For the president to continue to write executive orders and sign them, legislating the closure of the Department of Education, the creation of something called DOGE that is going to oversee the rest of the government. I mean, it's a utopian state in a way that you can think. Dystopian from the fact that nobody actually thought this could happen to this extent. But if you think about what Donald Trump has said all along, he did not believe that he should be controlled by the U.S. Constitution. And so that means we're going to have these constitutional crises. The last point that you made, I think, is so important. How will the people react? The lawyers have already capitulated. The judges are afraid of impeachment. So it's going to be the people. And will this then erupt into what could be a civil war?
Well, do you think it is that serious that we could talk about this becoming the beginning of a civil war in the United States? I mean, that's a serious claim to make. Do you see that in the making?
What I see in the making is that you have a country where there are more guns than people. You have voices that are not being heard. Right now, the last one of the last executive orders the president signed was around voter suppression and the elections. So he's already working on suppressing the vote for the upcoming midterm elections. We don't know if people are going to be laid off from the government. There's a lot of anger that's building up, and fear and concern that not only Elon Musk and Donald Trump have taken over our government, but we have no voice because the Democratic politicians can't seem to get their house in order. So at this point, what people have been doing is protesting, and the protests have been small. But as these cuts in jobs And as prices rise and then the tariffs begin to take effect, I think people are going to take to the streets more and more in their demands that the government listen to them. And if the government's not going to listen, I think it's going to be a violent outcome.
Professor, I'm wondering what do you think would happen if Donald Trump were to say that he could point to a majority of Americans who are in support of him having a third term, and he should say, listen, the people are for it, I'm willing to do it, why not just say yes? I mean, what would happen then?
Because that's not the way our country works. You could say that about slavery. You could say that about women's rights. If you say to the people, what does the majority want? What then are we saying to minorities in this country, in a country made up of immigrants? What are you going to say about those people who are marginalized? Are we going to get rid of the disabled? Or, is it going to be majority fiat for everyone else who's here and we all live in fear of the majority will? Too many people, as you know from your nation's history, have gone along with strong-armed politicians. And just because the majority says so is not the reason why it should happen. That's why we have three branches of government. That's why the framers went out of their way not to have a king in this nation. We can't even, under the Constitution, we can't not have even royal pronouncements of prince, duke, or earl.
Well,
it is
Professor,
outlawed in our Constitution.
Let me ask you about that. How confident are you that the American people are going to, remember those roots of 1776 or 1787? A couple of weeks ago, the president said that he thought it would be possible, he would like the idea of the U.S. joining the British Commonwealth. And when he said that, there was a lot of reaction on social media as if 1776 never happened. I mean, are the American people, are they on the same page with you here?
This is what's happened over the last 20 years, is the dumbing down of the U.S. regarding government, civics, the Constitution. It's been taken out of our schools and many K through 12 schools, and it's limited in our higher education. So you're right, and it's fearfully so that there are many people who don't even understand what our Constitution has to say. They know they have rights, but they don't really know what those rights are. I have the animated series called Your Democracy that's free for the public. And I created that animated series. It won an Emmy Award so that people would have access to learn more about their constitutions. We have so many people coming to this country from other places, and they're not taking constitutional law.
Right.
They're grown. They're not in college. They don't know, and their children may not be able to know what war was fought. They might not know what 1776 means.
Yeah.
They celebrate the 4th of July without not knowing the meaning of the history. I'm concerned that playing on the lack of information of our nation, of our general people who are good people overall, but are following, what they see on the media, social media, without understanding the ramifications of it. I fear that in a way, but I also know that people see how much money they have in the bank. They see how prices are rising, and they see that we have somebody who doesn't really care about the regular person. And that's a concern I have around constitutional rights.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I certainly appreciate your time, your passionate arguments tonight. Professor Gloria Brown Marshall at John Jay College in New York City. Professor, good seeing you. Thanks again.